Hello, 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 everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you. Welcome back. We're going to be reading the next few sections in chapter 8. We're going to start to go over some questions that will go along with the archetypal wheel that you may be putting together for yourself at this point. So that is the focus of this chapter, is putting together your archetypal wheel that you will make for yourself only once and then use in the future to help you use more of the positive aspects of your archetype, of whatever archetypes you choose, rather than using more of the shadow side. And I am going to be talking quiet because my daughter is trying to go to bed. Tomorrow's her last day of school, and I wasn't planning on making a video, but I got a little bit of a late night reading bug. So I figured, why not come on here and make another section or read another section from this book. And I just realized that my cat is in here, so I'm sorry if he makes noise. Okay, so now we're going to be asking ourselves some questions. And again, the name of this chapter for 8 is Creating Your Chart of Origin. And we just got done talking about how we choose and place our archetypes according to the numbers. And now we're going to be going over some questions that'll help us further put together this wheel. So examining your spiritual real estate with pen in hand. So if you remember in the beginning of the book, the author did say that you may want to have a piece of paper and a pen handy, and you may want to do that now if you want to. And of course, you can always pause this and come back later if you need to. All right. The questions that follow are designed to elicit your reflections on memories of your major experiences. They're meant to cause you to interpret these experiences in symbolic ways, such as how they introduced you to overall life patterns. As with all the exercises in this book, the more detailed you can be, drawing on your successes and failures, the challenges you faced, and the ones you ran away from, the better. Let your feelings and responses emerge from within. As you enter your answers in your journal, you should also record any imagery, dreams, or associations that come to mind, even if they don't seem to make sense. These questions are directed as much to your unconscious as to your conscious mind. The conscious mind often produces instant replies in one word or brief phrases, while the unconscious will give you impressions and images. If some of the questions baffle you the first time around, come back to them later. Often, when you stop thinking about a question and trying to force an answer or image will present itself spontaneously. Please make a note of any answers, no matter when and where they pop into your mind. Answer all the questions for each archetype and house. So you've got your 12 houses and your 12 archetypes. So you're focusing on the 12 that you chose. Okay, so let me see. I think, here's some questions. What are my immediate associations with this archetype and the meaning of its house? So you're going to do this for each one of the 12. In almost all cases, when you focus your attention on an archetype and the meaning of its house, you will get a rapid flow of intuitive perceptions, even before your conscious mind takes over and jogs your memories. Your intuition provides you with data that is timeless and transcends literal thinking. So that was the question you're going to ask all 12. What are my immediate associations with this archetype and the meaning of its house? A journalist named David was drawn to the spellcaster archetype because he believed that by researching stories that revealed the corrupt side of society, he broke the spells that controlled people's minds. When David cast his wheel, his spellcaster archetype landed in the 11th house, which rules our relationships to the outside world. His first impression was that he was the one who was under a spell, and that he was revolted by this impression, that he gave a fairly theatrical description of why this archetype was in the wrong place, a sure signal that his rational mind had kicked into gear. But as we analyzed that impression from a more detached perspective, David could begin to consider why he was controlled by his opinion that the world is a dark place dominated by ruthlessness and greed, and why he needed to make his readers agree with him. He finally saw that the spellcaster's voice had led him into a lifelong pattern of wanting to influence the opinions of others. But by writing about only negative actions, attitudes, and beliefs, he was unconsciously giving people permission to act negatively. Now, when David writes, he expresses his thoughts quite differently, because although he still is dedicated to spellcasting, he is spreading hope for how life could be, rather than dread about how life is and will always be. And the next question: what specific experiences come to my mind as I think of the partnership between this archetype and its house? One man, on discovering that his judge archetype had landed in his 11th house, which rules our relationships to the outside world, had a first impression that he was always judging everyone and everything in the outside world. He had originally chosen the judge because he had a lifelong regard for the workings of the law, but he also found this archetype active in other areas of his life. I realize, he said, that everyone has opinions, but I am obsessive about my judgments. I find something to dislike in everyone, but I am now learning to curb that fault finding. When I started to work one-on-one with these archetypes, I saw that I am inclined to find fault with something or someone long before I find anything of value. I wonder now who might have become a dear friend were it not for my judgments, and what I could have experienced had I not judged, had it not been for my judgments. Had it not been for my judgments, and what I could have experienced had I not judged it ahead of time to be meaningless. I can relate to that in a major way. I am very, very quick to judge. I've gotten better about it as I've gotten older and more self-aware and just looking at life differently. But I could tell you that I have lost so many friends over what I thought were big deals back then, but it was just humans being humans, right? And it was such a big deal back then, and I look back and it's like, it doesn't even matter now, and I don't have those friendships anymore. And even if you try to rekindle, sometimes things just never quite feel the same. Every now and again, it can happen that you do pick up where you left off and maybe things are even better. But I notice a lot of times when there is a falling out of some sort and you rekindle a friendship, it's just not the way that it was, and you can just never quite get that back. And I have suffered from that, from being judgmental. All right. At the same time, I have had to examine the positive aspect of the judge, and I have learned that dismissing the judge entirely and disliking myself for being judgmental is inappropriate. I need to learn discernment. I need to release my desire to want to run the world as a courtroom with me, presiding over the crowds and delivering sentences to those I consider criminals. It's up to me to keep my center when I am with people whom I would otherwise have condemned. And we have to remember with every archetype, just like the author said, archetypes are neutral. It is only what we do in deeming a behavior or an attitude as negative or positive. And so you can use that, obviously, when learning your archetypes, to hone in on the positive aspect rather than the shadow aspect of your archetypes. This is amazing. I knew nothing about archetypes before, and I wasn't super duper interested when I initially got started reading this, but I definitely am. Trouble is, I've tried to go through and figure out my archetypes, and I have it down to 17, so I have to keep weeding through it to kind of see if I can get it down to 12 and feel confident in those 12 without second guessing my intuition, my gut instinct. Recently, for example, I met a person who had lived in an ashram for a few years. The old me would have immediately labeled that individual a religious fanatic. But in that moment, I decided to pursue a conversation about what had motivated him to choose that lifestyle and what he had gained from it. Instead of dismissing him, I learned something from him about spiritual dedication. This is a hard habit to break for me, however. As soon as the conversation was over, I immediately fell into criticizing every word he had spoken. I had to repeat the conversation in my head, but when I did, I focused on why I was afraid of people like him, instead of reviewing what I thought was wrong. Wait, did I read that wrong? Wait a minute. When I did, I focused on why I was afraid of people like him, instead of reviewing what I thought was wrong with him. Okay, that represented a major change for me. And the next question: what associations with relationships do I have with this archetype and house? Noting that she had the saboteur archetype in her third house, which is self-expression and siblings, one woman told me that as the middle child between two older and younger siblings, she was always working to maintain harmony in the family. I felt that the rivalry that existed with my siblings was always destroying or sabotaging what could have been a great family, she said. We had every opportunity to be close. We had great parents and great relatives. But one of my brothers and both of my sisters had what I would call lousy chemistry. They were forever turning the household upside down with arguments and all sorts of destructive behavior. One time I actually yelled at them, "You are ruining this family for no reason." And I had been aware then of the saboteur. Had I been aware then of the saboteur, I would have said that they broke up the family as if they were on a guerrilla mission. So this archetype in that house makes a great deal of sense to me. And now as an adult, I use that experience as a personal point of reference, in that I no longer see myself as the one responsible for settling confrontational relationships between people. Getting in the middle of negative exchanges between people is an act of self-sabotage, because I end up doing harm to my own relationships with everyone by getting in the crossfire. That's very true. You always go in with the best of intentions, especially when it's people you love, and somehow it just doesn't work out. And our next question here. Let me actually check and see how many we have. I would love to do all of these. Okay, so I'm going to read all of this section, and then the next section is still a set of questions, but they're focusing on the past and present. These that we're doing right now are just our opening questions, and then we're going to be going deeper in the next section. Okay, so we'll finish this one. All right. I think I lost my spot here. Okay. What issues of power come to mind as I review this archetype and its house? You will have to ask yourself this question more than once, because it requires serious excavation of your motives. Power issues have to do with control and its manifestations, as well as with ambition, values, generosity of spirit and self, and so much more. Every part of our lives involves some exchange of power. We either gain or lose power in everything we do, say, or think, whether we are conscious or unconscious of our behavior, and we are usually more conscious of it than we care to admit. That's true. We intend to use power to gain advantages for ourselves. Jerry had the mother archetype in her second house, which is life values. And nothing was more important to her than being a mother. Her life was wrapped around caring for her children, and she believed that her role as the good mother afforded her the right and power to determine her children's values. Jerry's lifelong desire to have a home and family influenced many of the decisions she had made from her earliest years. She knew the kind of man she would date and the degree program, elementary education, that would allow her to have a job that would have the same vacation days as her own children. Her image of what makes a woman a good mother came from her mother and grandmother, who had passed on the importance of imparting high moral and ethical standards to one's children. But it wasn't enough for Jerry to just pass along a strict code of values. She wanted to ensure that her children would never stray far from her authority or outgrow their need for her, because then it would be difficult for her to maintain control over them. She communicated messages of dependency to her children by saying things like, "Nobody will ever do this for you better than I do," and "Mother knows best." Believing that she was acting in their best interests, she frequently asked her kids how they intended to survive as adults without her to guide them. Jerry's good mother image was more in keeping with the devouring or smothering mother, a shadow aspect of the mother archetype. How heartbreaking. Not only did Jerry devour or undermine her children's power, she also undermined her husband's strength by convincing him that she was better suited than he to take charge of the children. These tendencies grew out of control until a couple of Jerry's close friends sat down with her one day and conducted a kind of intervention, telling her that her need to be the center of attention amounted to narcissism, and that her attempts to control everyone around her was threatening her relationships with her family and friends. After the intervention, Jerry examined other relationships that made her need to be seen as invaluable and saw that she had a fear of not being needed and of being left behind. In order to heal her attachments to being needed, she looked at her house of values, which is our second house, and examined the source of her desire to be of a greatest value. As a result of these insights, Jerry initiated a personal practice that she called stepping outside herself, to view her interactions with others. Whenever she noticed that she was slipping into the pattern of craving attention, she immediately turned the camera on herself, examining her fear of being invisible to others. By calling her own attention to this pattern, little by little, Jerry was able to engage in relationships without the motivation to be seen as significant to everyone she interacted with. All right, and the last question, or wait, two more, but they've got relatively short answers. What kind of power do I associate with this archetype? Be specific in your description of your power associations with each archetype, and make certain that you list both the positive and the negative associations. Simon had the prostitute in the 6th house, which is occupation and health, and recognized that he was selling his conscience through his occupation for the sake of his income. The insurance company he worked for was taking financial advantage of its clients, in that it had a policy not to renew contracts with people once they filed even a single claim. Yet his fear of not finding another job kept him working there. Simon felt that he was practicing extortion. Because he earned a good paycheck, however, he was afraid to move on. This situation was costing him his self-respect. But once Simon was able to see that the prostitute served a positive function, warning him that he could not continue to negotiate away his ethics, he began planning his move away from the company. It took time, but eventually he found a job elsewhere that did not force him to compromise his values. And the last question for this section. When I combine the archetype with its house, what experiences can I recall that directly relate to learning about my relationship to power? Am I competitive? Have I ever harmed another person because of my actions, power plays, or ambitions? Have I ever helped to empower someone else in any of the areas of this house? So that's several questions. It's actually probably better that I'm only giving you these, because this gives you plenty to think about until we read the next one. It's plenty, maybe too much to give at once. Okay, so here's her answer. The 7th house, for example, rules your relationships. Ask yourself if you have deliberately blocked someone else's opportunities or empowerment because it threatened you. Look in your past for experiences that have taught you about the nature of true empowerment. Then see if you can determine which archetypes awakened your desire to pursue your highest potential. Okay, that wasn't easy reading it very quietly. All right, so that's the end of the first section with these questions. And then in the next section, we're going to read questions from a section titled From the Past to Present. And let me see if there are any others in here. No, that's going to be, these are just the only two last sections of this chapter. All right, so we'll stop right there and we'll finish up with these questions in our next video. Thank you so very much for joining me. Again, I'm sorry that I had to talk quietly. Maybe you found it kind of relaxing. I can do it more if you prefer it. I don't mind. But until I see you again, take care of yourself. Take care of those around you. I love you all very much. And I will see you for the next section of this video or of this chapter. See you soon. Bye-bye.